Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/Nerdery and Murdery. That's audibletrial.com/Nerdery and Murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/Nerdery and Murdery. That's betterhelp.com/Nerdery and Murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
3 years ago, we started this with a replacements episode. At 2 years, we did an episode about 3 more albums about the replacements. And I always said that I would get back to talking about the sound of Minneapolis. There's actually 2 sounds of Minneapolis. We're going to talk about one in this episode and one in the next. So Minneapolis and St. Paul have 2 unique sounds. We're going to talk about them. In 1977, live music is either cover bands or oldies bands.
So I'm curious, are we diving into this before we actually even introduce ourselves?
Maybe.
You're an idiot. Welcome to episode 147 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 147. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows and the up and down, the good and the bad, and the nerd and the murd. Looks like Zig was just so excited he just had to jump into it.
Yeah, I started talking about it in the staff.
Yeah, you did. You just jumped right in. I was like, hello, what are we doing here? I actually had a couple of things that I was going to mention.
Please go ahead.
One, I watched the new Roadhouse. I love the old Roadhouse. I love the old Roadhouse. I really, really do.
Yeah.
It's a favorite of mine. I can't help it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I like the new Roadhouse, and I see a lot of people really panning this one.
I don't know why. It's a better movie.
I disagree. The first one is the better movie. This one has its high points. It really does. it's not as immediately action packed as the first one. It kind of takes a while to get into it. But Jake Gyllenhaal is great in this.
Oh yeah,
I think he's phenomenal. I just
he's so
love the
polite,
he is
even
so
when he's
polite.
whipping somebody's ass.
Yes, because I love the scene where he's up against Dell and talking to him, and then he just slaps him, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just slapped you," and then proceeds to slap everybody around him to beat him up. I mean,
Like five guys. I slapped you too. Okay, we could stop, or you guys could keep going.
I thought Conor McGregor was very cool, very over the top, but I thought
Yeah,
the
walking around.
character was good. I enjoyed it. I see so many people just panning this, but I thought they did a great job. I do not think it's as good as the original. And
I think it's a better movie than the
I
original. The
I don't.
original was a little formulaic. I'm not saying it's not a good movie. This flick is just, it kind of comes out of left field. I loved it. I thought it was a better made movie. Maybe I should put it that
I enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed it. I
way. I
mean,
thought it was
I
great.
would watch it. I would watch it again. I really
I
would.
I and full props to actually portraying an actual beach bar, because you don't, you know, beach bars are a thing if you live near the coast
Hmm.
or on a lake. You there's these things called beach bars where you can drink, you can get food. Um, they're usually run by a family. They're not big mega structures, and generally they've been there for 40, 50 years. They're awesome.
Yeah,
And this is what a beach bar is.
yeah, yeah. Really, really, really good. Like I said, really enjoyable. I would definitely watch it again. I was glad I stopped down to watch that. The other thing that I picked up, just because I was looking for something light. I just kind of wanted to wind down my evening and look for something light, and I think I was on Hulu. But anyway, I saw it and I'm like, man, I haven't watched this in years, and I'm going to see if I still enjoy it. And I started watching Moonlighting. I'd forgotten how funny that show was,
Oh my God. Yeah.
and
Especially that
really
first
good.
season.
Yeah, yeah. So I've stepped into that just for something light to watch. And if you've never seen Moonlighting, I mean, Bruce Willis, a very very young Bruce Willis, and Sybil Shepherd, they play off each other so well. Just really, really cool. So anyway, those are just a couple of things that I had to mention that I found interesting.
Nice.
So so anyway, before you jump out of your pants, why don't you kick us off on the nerdery side of the house?
Well, we could talk about Roadhouse and Moonlighting. But yeah, so happy third anniversary, sir.
Thank you. Happy third anniversary to you.
Will, if you're listening, we made it 3 years, mofo.
I don't think he listens anymore.
He has to. He edits it. Yeah. So 3 years ago, we started with the replacements. I'm gonna go back to. I always said I would talk about the different sounds in different places. Minneapolis had its own sound in the '80s. Um, yeah, there were some elements of hardcore punk, but it's not hardcore punk. It's different. It sounds like Minneapolis, and for one way or another, it's great. And then at the same time, in the same, well, I say city, it's actually two cities. You've got Minneapolis and St. Paul, but in the exact same time, in the exact same places, there was a funk jazz revival going on, and all of these people got together and worked together. And I want to explore the beauty of those sounds, because they're still alive today. They're in both these lists. I have modern representations of this Minneapolis sound. So we're going to dive into it. So it's 1977. And if you want to go hear live music, you either get cover bands, you go to the convention center and hear a big band come through, or it's like a oldies band. So there's nobody writing original songs playing. So these two groups of people decide to make a scene because they wanted to not only play live music, but they wanted to hear live music, and they didn't want to hear, covers and oldies. Um, they just needed some places to play. So what they did was they got together and created these places, and some of them are still with us today. They are the Blitz Bar, Jay's Longhorn Bar, which became Zoogie's, Uncle Sam's, which became the 7th Street Entry, and Duffy's. Um, I want to kick off and talk about Jay's Longhorn Bar, which was basically the first one. It's most frequently referred to by the patrons as the Longhorn. Jay's Longhorn Bar was described by music critics as legendary, part of the punk and new wave genre's history and a punk rocker's paradise. One of the earliest clubs in America to regularly book punk, new wave, and alternative rock bands. The Longhorn was the only concert stage in Minnesota where touring acts in those genres could regularly perform until the opening of what became First Avenue. First Avenue, most famously portrayed in Purple Rain. The Police, Blondie, and all the big acts played there, wrote Husker Du's guitarist Bob Mould, who frequented the venue and noted that he considered Husker Du an actual band only after they had performed at the Longhorn stage. Robert Wilkinson, singer for the Minneapolis punk band The Flamingo, noted that the terms of importance of the scene were the Longhorn was Minneapolis's CBGBs. The Longhorn was also an important crucible of local punk rock scene. It was the first bar ever played by both of the scene's most highly influential bands, Husker Du on May 13th, 1979, and The Replacements on July 2nd, 1980. Peter Jesperson, the Replacements manager and founder of Twin Tone Records, was also a DJ at the Longhorn at the time. He signed the band to Twin Tone immediately after their performance. Influential Minneapolis new wave band The Suburbs also had their first major success at the Longhorn. Drummer Hugo Clara said that after getting regular gig at the venue, we went from nobodies to this super popular band. It was just crazy. The Longhorn shows were always packed. So we're going to talk about The Suburbs first. And The Suburbs actually kind of helped get the Longhorn started. They were kind of instrumental in getting it off the ground. The Suburbs were an alternative punk rock funk new wave band in Minneapolis that was popular in the late 70s and the 80s. The band frequently headlined it at the most influential music clubs, the aforementioned Jay's Longhorn Bar, and First Avenue and 7th Street Entry. Did you get a chance to listen to The Suburbs Life is Like?
You didn't give me a list.
Oh. It was on the YouTube playlist and Spotify.
You didn't give me a list.
Okay. The
It's your fault.
Suburbs Life is Like. It is not a punk rock song by any means. It is more of a garage band sound, but you can kind of hear that punk rock sound kind of coming through, even though it's muted. It's a lot like The Replacements. It's hard, but it's not a killer. How do I put this? Suburbs Life is Like. It's an indie song. It's something that you expect to hear on college radio. I love it. The Suburbs were basically the biggest band in the area, and the second biggest band in the area, and they helped get Jay's Longhorn Bar off the ground and started. This is definitely one I would recommend. The next band is Flamingo. Flamingo changed their name to the Flaming O's, and they became more of a quote unquote new wave sound. The song I picked for them is I Remember Romance. It's kind of that transition period between them being kind of a a garage band and a quote unquote new wave band. I really don't care about those labels. Um, but with uh with Flamingo, there was definitely a sea change, so you kind of have to say something about it. During the late 70s, due to a possible lawsuit over the name, uh, Flamingo, they dropped the G and split the original word, and they became the Flaming O's. During the 1980s, in 1985, the band saw changes in both its name and personnel. The band formally adopted the name fans had long since used, the O's, with new member Gary Snow, bass guitar and vocals, and Teddy Brandt. So they were Flamingo, then they were the Flamin' O's, and they were just the O's. But they were kind of again, kind of that 1980s new wave sound, quintessentially 1980s. But they still retained that rock and roll sort of garage rock sound to them, even though they were using synthesizers. They were still pretty big with guitars. Have you ever heard I Remember Romance by the Flamin' O's?
Uh-uh.
Nope. Okay.
Uh-uh.
The next one is Complicated Fun by Suicide Commandos. The Suicide Commandos were basically the first band, them and the Suburbs, that wanted to get this place to play. The Suicide Commandos, what they would do is they would do a mostly cover show, and then they would do, oh, hey, here's a new song by Black Sabbath, check it out. And then they would play they would play an original and no one noticed. They formed in 1975. They released two 7-inch EPs on an indie label in 1976 and 1977 before signing with Blank Records, a subsidiary of Mercury, in 77, and they released one album making a record. Despite the short original 4-year stint together, the Suicide Commandos are considered the pioneers for jump-starting a punk rock music scene in the Twin Cities, which eventually produced bands like The Suburbs, Husker Du, The Replacements, and Soul Asylum. I would say The Suburbs and Suicide Commandos are kind of 1A and 1B for this sound. Because again, it's punk rock, but it's not just about the punk rock. It's there's more to it than that. There's more. How do I put it? You know who Roger Miller is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Roger Miller inspired a lot of these singers out of Minneapolis. So there's a bit of that weird sort of folk country sound to them.
Right.
That's also kind of humorous. It plays through this entire list, as well as that funk element that was coming from the other side of the music scene. Because again, a lot of these people would they would play on the same bills. It was not uncommon to see The Time and Curtis A, who's another musician on this list, play on the same bill. It's amazing. It's Minneapolis and St. Paul. They have 7 to 8 months of winter. And I don't mean just winter. I mean like winter, you know. They have their downtown district is linked by either underground or above ground skyway tunnels because it's so cold and there's so much snow outside. It goes for miles. The whole downtown area where the high rises are, there are tunnels that link all of these buildings together so you don't ever have to go outside. That's how bad it is. So a lot of these guys, they would be holed up into their basements or into places together, and they would play music because there's only so much you can do for 7 to 8 months out of the year. That's why the music scene is so strong there, because they didn't have anything else to do.
You'd be surprised. They do stuff there.
They do stuff.
They're used to the cold.
Yes, they're used to the cold, but this music scene started because of the winter. And got people out going to these places to see them play. Um, the next song is I'm assuming you haven't heard "Complicated Fun" by Suicide Commandos. It's pretty easy. Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to know any of these songs.
The next one is Curtis A. Sinister Forces. Curtis A. born Kurt Olmsted on January 31st, 1951, is a musician and visual artist from Minneapolis. One of the original artists on the Twin Tone record label. He performed out of the most popular shows in the Twin Cities and an annual tribute to John Lennon held at First Avenue. He was the first musician to headline the First Avenue Sister Club 7th entry and opened for Prince's first concert at First Avenue. They still called it Uncle Sam's. So Uncle Sam's became First Avenue. And Uncle Sam's became First Avenue, and Duffy's became the 7th Street entry. That's correct. Sorry. It's a lot of stuff to keep in my head. Curtis A is one of those. He's one of those unsung heroes. He's like Nick Lowe or so Nick Lowe. But if you don't have Nick Lowe, you don't get Elvis Costello. If you don't have Curtis A, you don't get a lot of these other musicians. And again, he kind of crossed over. He played with everybody because there was a lot of funk in his music. He was also a visual artist. He did a lot of video stuff and paintings. He's just like one of those weird old art dudes that runs around in your hometown. And he was kind of instrumental in keeping this together. And it was him, the Suicide Commandos, and again the Suburbs, who were kind of keeping this fire lit for a long time. So if you haven't heard Curtis A, you need to get out there and check him out. Again, the song is Sinister Forces. It's my favorite Curtis A song. He's got some other stuff that's a little more jazzy, funky, but I like this one because it's got some fairly raucous guitars in it. The next band is the Hipsters, spelled Hypstrz, and Don't Look Back. They were a garage group formed in the late 70s in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Hipsters are still playing in and around that area, but they are definitely a garage band. They sound like 1960s garage bands. I don't.
So they're a garage band that sounds like a garage band.
Yeah, like the Kingsmen or 96, like Louie, 96 Tears. If you Reckless Eric's Search the Whole World. If you like that sound, you're gonna love the Hipsters. Just really kind of raw and not necessarily punk, but definitely a good time. Good time in band. The next band in the list is Babes in Toyland and their song Sweet 69. Babes in Toyland was an American alternative rock band from Minneapolis, formed in 1987. So they formed kind of late. The band was founded by vocalist and guitarist Kat Belland, along with drummer Lori Barbero and bassist Michelle Leon, who was later replaced by Maureen Herman in 1992. Babes in Toyland formed in 87 after frontwoman Kate Belland met drummer Lori Barbero at a friend's barbecue. Originally from Woodburn, Oregon, and a former resident of San Francisco, Belland had moved to Minneapolis to form a band because of everything that was going on there. Belland was a self-taught guitarist, and at the time, Barbero had no experience playing any instrument. Belland commented, "Hopefully, from being technically inexperienced, you can use your imagination and play the drums like an instrument instead of just being a beat keeper, and play the bass like you feel it from your gut. Instead of saying, here's my scales." In its initial formation in 1987, in addition to Belland and Barbero, the band included Chris Holtz on bass and singer Cindy Russell. Babes in Toyland actually got kind of big. But the thing about Babes in Toyland, before Belland joined the band, Barbero was a fixture in the scene. So Barbero, I think she even dated Paul Westerberg for a while.
Hmm.
She was a fixture in the scene. She was kind of like a journalist, like a music journalist, but she also had like a day job. But she'd been going to those clubs and doing the music scene for years and years and years, and everybody knew her. And Bellin came along and says, "You know what? We need to be in a band together." And they actually got kind of big. This in the mid to late '90s. They did a bunch of wildly inappropriate songs. Sweet 69 being one of them. But it's hard. There's definitely, you can hear that punk rock sound in there. But it's not just punk rock. There's more to it than that. Again, like a lot of this Minneapolis sound, it's it's solid. So if you haven't heard Babes in Toyland, you should go check them out. But again, keep in mind they're going to be a little harder than a lot of these bands in this list. So the next band is Yipes, and this is your life. Yipes, spelled YIPES exclamation point. Band members Pat McCurdy, Mike Hoffman, and Peter Strand had been playing together since 1971, but they formed Yipes in 1977 after the addition of Teddy Freeze and Andy Bartell. After winning a Battle of the Bands contest, the group submitted a demo tape to Millennium Records, which signed the group. Their debut self-titled album was issued in 1979, and a follow-up release appeared in 1980. During this time, Yipes opened for Cheap Trick, Foreigner, Kansas, and Jefferson Starship. In 1980, Yipes charted the Billboard Hot 100 with its cover of Darlin', the Beach Boys song. The band was dropped from their label in 1981 and disbanded soon after. So they didn't last very long. They do get together and play uh, the 7th Street Entry, which is part of First Avenue. So 7th Street Entry, or First Avenue, I should say this, was a bus terminal. There is a side door around the side of the block where there's another door that goes into the club. They were separate clubs at one point, but now they're kind of together. But First Avenue is on First Avenue. 7th Street Entry is on 7th Street around the corner. First Avenue and 7th Street Entry every year will do like a retrospective of the bands that have played there and how important they were in the Minneapolis sound. Yipes is always in that conversation. So they play there, kind of like the 40 Watt Club in Athens, Georgia. All these great bands that came out of there, they'll go and play an anniversary show ever so often, including REM. Even though REM's broken up, they've played a 40 Watt show in the last 4 or 5 years. But it's a locals thing, if that makes sense. I'm assuming you've never heard Yipes.
No, you can assume I have not heard of it. I don't know these, man. Like I said, you didn't give me a list. This is your fault.
This is my fault. Totally my fault.
You don't remind me there's a list out there. I'm not going to know.
Okay. Well, for the next one, there's a list.
Yes, I know that. I know that now.
The next band is Husker Du. Pink Turns to Blue. This is off of the seminal album Zen Arcade. Zen Arcade is the second studio album by American punk rock band Husker Du, released in July of 1984 on SST Records, which is a punk rock label out of LA. Actually, I think SST is based somewhere in Texas now, because it was cheaper to live here. Originally released as a double album on 2 vinyl LPs, Zen Arcade tells the story of a young boy who runs away from an unfulfilling home life only to find the world outside is even worse. Zen Arcade and subsequent Husker Du albums were instrumental in the creation of the alternative rock genre, and it is considered by some to be one of the greatest rock albums of all time. So basically how it plays out, SST released 2 double albums, one from Husker Du and one from the Minutemen, called Double Nickels on the Dime. Zen Arcade by Husker Du and Double Nickels on the Dime are, as far as alternative rock goes, Led Zeppelin 4 and what's the Beatles' big album? The really big one
The
that
White Album.
everybody, the White Album. Okay, so yeah,
Yeah, the White
the White Album.
Album. I mean, the White Album, Revolver, Rubber Soul.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the one that everybody has uh,
Sergeant
with all the people on the
Pepper's.
front of it. Sergeant Pepper's. Okay, so yes, Husker Du, Zen Arcade would be Sergeant Pepper's, and Double Nickels on the Dime by the Minutemen would be Led Zeppelin 4. That's how big in the genre these two albums are. And this is one of them. This is Pink Turns to Blue is a bit of a slower tune because there's a lot of really hard stuff on Zen Arcade. It's still definitely got that hard sound to it. Bob Bull's guitar is Bob Bull's guitar. It's always going to sound that way. But Pink Turns to Blue is a little less hard edge, so that's why I picked this one. But I wanted to put something off of Zen Arcade because it's that important. And the fact that an album from this area needs to be in that conversation because everybody, in the early 90s, everybody was like Seattle, Seattle, Seattle. It's like, no. Everybody has their own sound. You should hear them all. Yeah, this one is seminal. The next one is Sometime to Return by Soul Asylum. The band was originally called
Hey, I know
Loud
this
Fast.
band.
Yeah, Loud Fast Rules, with a lineup consisting of Dave Pirner, Dan Murphy, Carl Mueller, and Pat Moore. They changed their name to Soul Asylum in 1983, and Morley was replaced with Grant Young in 1984. The band recorded 3 albums with Twin Tone Records and 2 with A&M with little commercial success. In 1992, they released a triple platinum album, Grave Dancers Union, featuring Runaway Train. The band played at the inauguration of President Bill Clinton early the next year. They also scored a platinum record with the album Let Your Dim Light Shine 3 years later. In 1998, they recorded Candy from a Stranger. The band released 4 more albums over the next 15 years. Their most recent was Hurry Up and Wait in 2020, their 12th studio release. Unfortunately, Carl Mueller was diagnosed with cancer in 2004, and the band organized a benefit concert on his behalf. And Carl Mueller died a year later. So mostly the band is Dave Pirner by himself. Dan Murphy is kind of semi-retired. He owns an antique business off to the side, and that's basically what he does now. He's just gotten, he's been a rock and roller for most of his life, and he's just kind of semi-retired. He will get together and play with Dave Pirner again. Those First Street and 7th Street Entry anniversary shows, they both show up for those. This song is off of Hang Time,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually a major label. It's paired with Cartoon usually. When people hear the song, they want to hear Sometime to Return to Cartoon. We've reviewed Cartoon before. To me, this is what Soul Asylum is supposed to sound like. When they had their big hits later on, I liked it, but I did not like it as much as Sometime to Return. Or Cartoon. I think Cartoon's the best song they ever did. But yeah, this is right in that wheelhouse where it's not really punk rock. It's just hard. It's almost metalish. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's indicative of that Minneapolis St. Paul sound. The last band in the list
That Geoffrey doesn't know.
Wilma and the Wilburs for Little Joey. Wilma, also known as Kathy Mason, started out in the early 80s, and Wilma and the Wilburs were a fixture in the sound. Wilma and the Wilburs is kind of like Martha and the Muffins. Yes. They're kind of God, I don't know how I can relate them. Kind of like the B-52s. If you like the B-52s, you're going to love Wilma and the Wilburs. They did not last long, but they were fixtures in the scene, and I wanted to put them in here because they're kind of the outside sort of goofy edge of this sound, and they just kind of fit as a bookend piece. So if you take the really hardcore stuff on one side, say Babes in Toyland, and you bookend it with Wilma and the Wilburs, you get a good cross section of what this sounds like. And again, the sound still continues. There's some other bands that are going on now. I might do them, the modern stuff that's coming out of this area for this sound because it still exists. It's still vibrant. There's still people playing. There's not as many clubs out there, and most of them are connected together now, but it's still a thing. It's not like 1977 where you couldn't hear live music that was made locally. It's there. It's happening. Duffy's is still around, as well as, you know, the First Street and the 7th Street entry. Jay's Longhorn Bar, which became Zoogie's, ended up being something else. It's like a storage facility. But after the pandemic, there was a big renewed effort to turn the Longhorn Bar back into a music venue because it's right around the corner from 7th Street entry. So that's going on right now. They also made a documentary about it, which I have included in the YouTube playlist, about that particular club. Yes, it was an important punk rock club and whatnot. Prince also played there. So did The Time. Everybody played there, and it's important to know that. But that's about it for episode 147, our third anniversary, Twin City Sounds.
Cool.
Part 1.
Cool. Yep. Again, Zig didn't provide me with the list. If you don't provide me with the list, I assume you don't want me to know beforehand, so I'm not going to listen.
Right on.
It's his fault.
All my fault.
So I'll have to go back and give a listen to these, see what I think about them. Hope everybody else does as well. You'll see the list on our page, and I'll give the link at the end of the episode. But you can see the list of the people. Oh my gosh, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Ah. Just over here making all kinds of noises. Awesome. So with that, then I will take over on the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Wikipedia, Medium, First Alert for News, and Bugged Space. And this is the story of the Dardeen family murder.
Dardeen family murder.
Yeah, and this is the murder. It just kind of intrigued me when it popped up in my in the various lists. I'm losing my mind. In various lists that I get where I get suggestions for this kind of stuff. This is kind of this is a very interesting one. It's not very long, but the year was 1986, and 29-year-old Russell Keith Dardeen and his 30-year-old wife Ruby Elaine Dardeen, they both went by their middle names, purchased a trailer outside their home in Ina, Illinois. Keith was a native of Mount Carmel, and he bought a trailer in 1986 after completing the training required for his job as a treatment plant operator at the Rend Lake Water Conservancy District's nearby facility. Elaine was from Albion, a little closer to Ina, and moved there later with their 2-year-old son Peter. They rented the land, and it sat on from a nearby farming couple. Elaine had found work at an office supply store, and when the young couple weren't working, they were part of the musical ensemble at a small Baptist church in the village. And Keith sang the lead vocals while Elaine played the piano. In 1987, Elaine became pregnant with the couple's second child, and they decided to name the baby Ian if they had a boy or Casey if they had a girl. And the pending addition to the family had led Keith and Elaine to strongly consider moving, and by late in the year, they had put the mobile home up for sale, realizing they needed more space for their growing family. However, that wasn't the only reason for their move. According to Keith's mother, Joanne Dardeen, he had expressed wishes to move back to his native Mount Carmel with his family because he regretted moving to Enid because there was growing violence in the area. Keith told his mother, quote, "There's just too many things happening down here." In Jefferson County during the previous 2 years, there had been 15 homicides, starting with those committed by Thomas Odell, a Mount Vernon teenager who killed his parents and 3 siblings as they individually returned to the home one night in 1985. And
Huh.
also in 1987, a 10-year-old girl had been raped and murdered in the area. And after this, Keith had become so protective of the family that one night when a young woman came by the mobile home asking if she could make a phone call, he refused to let her in. On November 18th, 1987, Keith, who was known for his reliability at work, failed to show up at the treatment plant. He hadn't informed anyone that he was going to be out, and calls to his house went unanswered throughout the day. His supervisor got concerned and contacted his parents, but they were also unaware of where their son was. So everybody grew increasingly worried, and Keith's parents alerted the sheriff's office and agreed to drive down to Ina with the house key to meet the deputies. The house was between Illinois Route 37 and the former Illinois Central Railroad tracks, which is now used by Union Pacific just north of the Franklin County line. Upon entering the trailer, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. They discovered the lifeless bodies of Elaine, 2-year-old Peter, and the young couple's newly born baby, all
Oh,
in one
wow.
bed. They were all tucked into the bed. Elaine and Peter had been bound and gagged with duct tape, and both had been beaten so severely that Elaine went into labor and delivered the girl.
Oh,
Tragically, whoever did this showed no mercy to the newborn and took her life as well.
wow. So newborn.
Yeah, newborn, like during the attack.
Oh my God.
The weapon of choice was a baseball bat, which was a birthday gift from Keith to Peter earlier that year.
Oh,
Sorry, my glass is whistling. While the 3 members were found dead, Keith was missing, along with the family car, which was a red 1981 Plymouth, and investigators initially assumed that Keith had murdered his family and fled. A team of armed police went to his mother's house in Mount Carmel looking for him, and a search team was assembled to find Keith, but their efforts were stopped the next day when a group of hunters found his body in a wheat field not far from the trailer. Keith had been shot 3 times in his skull, the right side of his face, and his left cheek, and his penis had been cut off.
was he trying to crawl for help?
Really don't know.
Okay.
Really don't know.
Wow.
Keith's car was actually found parked outside a police station in Benton, which was about 11 miles away from their home. The interior of the trailer was splattered with blood, suggesting that Keith had been murdered there and then transported later.
Okay.
Autopsies of the body were inconclusive in determining who was killed first, but it was established they were all killed within an hour or two of one another. So, was he trying to crawl away in the trailer? Who knows? Because there was blood everywhere inside of the trailer.
Yeah.
As the news of the Dardeen family homicides circulated throughout the area, locals were left even more fearful than they were already. This led to a surge in gun sales and security system installations. Many armed themselves, and many suffered very adverse psychological effects. Dr. Richard Garrettson, who is a family physician who doubled as the Jefferson County coroner, told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in early December of that year that many of his patients talked to him about the case and how it disturbed them. One man said he lived a half-mile from the Dardeen's trailer, told Garrettson he was having difficulty sleeping and lost 14 pounds as a result of stress. And also unable to sleep was the Dardeen's landlord's daughter, who told her parents later that year she'd kept her bedroom light on and read all night out of fear. After high school basketball games, students would wait in the school building for their parents to come in and accompany them to the parking lot for their ride home instead of socializing outside as they normally did. And Robert Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, felt much of the fear was unjustified. He said, "I don't think there's a rational basis for near hysteria. The people are frightening each other." But people were so afraid, he said, that if someone ran out of gas in the county, he would not seek assistance from any nearby homes, but would instead walk to the nearest highway and hitch a ride. So 30 detectives began working full-time in the case and were interviewing and interviewed over 100 people, but no significant leads were found. There was a man who was taken into custody early on and released after being questioned, and likewise a co-worker of Keith's with whom he reportedly had having a dispute with was cleared. Early reports from the police about the crime were limited and sometimes contradictory, allowing rumors to spread. The two counties' respective coroners differed on whether Keith had died of a head injury or being shot. Among those who reported the former, it was said that he had been inflicted when he was dragged from a car. The circumstances under which Elaine gave birth, perhaps posthumously, to her short-lived daughter, gave rise to the stories that Casey, as the family called her, had been ripped from her mother's womb. Investigators were left grappling with the motive behind the murders. The back door was unlocked, and there was no evidence of forced entry, and valuable items like a VCR and portable camera were left untouched in the living room. Remember, this was 1986. VCRs were expensive.
Yeah, they were.
Cash and jewelry were also left undisturbed in another room. And the crime scene investigators also ruled out rape or robbery as a motive. They believed that the murder was personal in nature and the act of mutilating Keith's genitals. Detectives considered that the crime may have been one of passion, with either Keith or Elaine taking part in an extramarital affair that got out of hand. However, after investigating, they couldn't find any evidence of disloyalty from either one. They also found no evidence of any grudges or financial troubles. There was a stack of papers with sports scores found in the house, which led them to consider maybe Keith had gambling debts. However, Keith's mother, Joanne, told the police that her son was so frugal that he raised funds from for his son's college education by reselling 50-cent cans of soda at work for small profit. Inside Keith's trailer, police did find a small amount of marijuana, but they found no conclusive evidence that they were involved in drug dealing. Keith's mother suggested that the marijuana may have belonged to the killers, and no one who knew the couple had anything bad to say about him.
Well, if a small amount of marijuana, if they'd only been there a year and a half, could have been the previous owners too, or it could have been theirs. A small amount of weed.
Yeah,
that does not necessarily,
but not enough to suggest drug dealing at all.
Yeah, exactly.
The brutality of the murders led some to believe in the area that it could have been the work of a cult trying to appease the devil, but no ritualistic symbols were found in the trailer.
This is in the middle of the satanic panic, too.
Yeah. A police expert on cults told the newspaper that the rumors of the Satanists were responsible was untrue, since such groups would often mutilate the bodies more extensively, harvest organs, and leave symbols and lit candles at the scene of their crimes. And again, none of these indications had been found at the trailer.
Yeah.
However, investigators did not believe the family was chosen at random. One investor commented, "I believe it was a very personal, deliberate thing." Police did allow, however, for the possibility that while the Dardeens were chosen purposely, it may have been a case of mistaken identity by the killer or killers. Joanne Dardeen later said that she had considered other motives someone might have had for killing her son and family. She said in 1997, quote, "I think someone wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused, or there's a possibility someone liked Elaine and she wouldn't accept his advances and he took out his rage on both of them. We just don't know." The coroners put the time of death for all the Dardeens at within an hour of each other. The bodies in the trailer had been killed 12 hours before they were found, and Keith had been dead for 24 to 36 hours when he was found. Resolving this question, however, made it hard to determine how the crime had been committed, since Keith's body was found away from the trailer, and he may have been killed at that location rather than with his family. They don't know.
Okay.
At the trailer, the killer or killers had apparently taken the time to not only tuck Elaine's body into the bed along with their children's bodies, but also to clean up the scene, suggesting they didn't feel any urgency to leave. The amount of effort involved led police to theorize that the crime may have taken place at night. The trailer was on Route 37, which was a busy state highway, but could have been seen at the time from Interstate 57, almost 2,000 feet to the west. And it was also an open question as to whether there was one killer or multiple. Eventually, the police exhausted all leads and had to start working other cases. Nearly 150 evidentiary items were labeled. Many had been sent to labs for multiple testing, and DNA samples remained from the victims, but none from suspects. Jefferson County shared their files with the FBI cold case unit. Two FBI profilers came to the area to review the evidence, and they were able to make some suggestions, but generally found that the crime defied their typical analytic methods. Unfortunately, as time passed, the case grew colder, but Keith's mother ensured that the authorities didn't forget the brutal murder. She continued to pressure authorities to solve the murders of her son and his family. And she even collected more than 3,000 signatures in an attempt to get the Oprah Winfrey Show to air a segment for the murders, but the producers declined, stating that the crime was too brutal for daytime television. America's Most Wanted initially had a similar reaction, but they changed their mind in 1998 and aired a segment. However, the show failed to generate any new leads. Police were briefly interested in serial killer Angel Maturino Resendez, then known by his alias Rafael Resendez Ramirez, after he surrendered to authorities in Texas in 1999. He often traveled the country by hopping freight trains, choosing his victims near the tracks as they traveled and often beating them to death. And while those elements did suggest the Dardeen killings, authorities in Illinois were never able to connect them to the crime. The most promising lead came in 2000 when serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells was arrested for cutting the throats of Kayleen Harris, who was 13, and Crystal Searles, 10, near Del Rio, Texas. One survived and helped police identify him, and he was eventually convicted and sentenced to death for that murder, and another one earlier in 99, where he had killed a girl in San Antonio. After his arrest, Tommy claimed that he had carried out the Dardeen killings along with other 70 unsolved murders. Sells said he did not remember the details of all the crimes he admitted to, which he described as a coping strategy from the sexual abuse he endured as a child in Missouri Boot Heel, but he did remember that one. He told police he began drinking at 7, was molested at 8, and started doing drugs at 10. He claims he tried to rape his mother at 13, and his family moved without telling him at 14, and his killing spree began when he was 15.
Wow.
Sells was confirmed to have committed at least 22 murders, but the investigators were unable to link him to the Dardeen family murders. In the mid-1980s, Sells was living primarily near St. Louis, which was roughly 90 miles northwest of Jefferson County, and making money from working at traveling carnivals and fairs as a day laborer or through theft. For the latter, he often hitched rides with truckers or hopped freights without any particular destination in mind. And he explained later, quote, "Anywhere a ride was going, I was heading that way. Might be Illinois today and Oklahoma tomorrow." He did give statements, but nothing matched the evidence. Sells claimed in 2010 that he met Keith at a truck stop. And while telling the story again, he said he met him at a local pool hall. In both versions, he said that Keith had invited him for dinner and a three-way with him and Elaine. He said he forced Keith at gunpoint to drive to where his body was found, killed and mutilated him, then returned to the trailer to kill Elaine and Peter, who were witnesses, although he says at the time it the result of an uncontrollable rage that Keith's alleged sexual offer had set off in him. He said, quote, "I was just so pissed off that I took it to the maximum limit. Rage don't have a stop button." In yet a third version, Sells dispensed with the encounter with Keith and the sexual proposition entirely. According to that account, he got off a freight and he had hopped near Ina. And when he saw the Dardeen trailer with its for sale sign, he saw an opportunity for killing. After drinking beers and waiting for the right time, he knocked on the door and told a wary Keith he was interested in buying the trailer. He then overpowered Keith, made him bind and gag his wife and son with duct tape, and then forced him to drive his car to the nearby field at gunpoint, where he sliced Keith's penis off, telling him he was going to take it back to Elaine, then shot him and left it there. At the trailer, he raped Elaine, then beat Peter, Elaine, and the newborn to death, and after cleaning up, he drove Keith's car to Benton. Keith's mother dismissed these claims, stating Keith was far too protective of his family to do such a thing. And as Sells was interviewed further, he was found to be less reliable. He incorrectly answered questions about the case. And while he answered some deals correctly, those details could have easily been gleaned from the news and media. In a 2010 interview, Sells stated, quote, "I know people have their doubts. They say there's no physical evidence tying me to the Dardeens, but there wasn't any for them because they weren't looking for me. I moved. I was always a transient." Again, police in Texas did confirm that Sells was responsible for 22 murders, but came to believe that in conscious imitation of another Texas serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, that he was trying to avoid the death penalty by confessing to crimes he had not committed and taking advantage of the judicial system's gratitude. Their counterparts in Illinois wanted to take Sells to Ina so they could see how well he knew the area and locations relevant to the crimes. He claimed he could lead them to missing evidence. However, Texas law does not allow prisoners on death row to be taken out of the state, and authorities were unwilling to find a way to make an exception. Sells was executed in 2014, and to this day, no one has ever been charged with the murders of the Dardeen family. It remains uncertain whether Tommy Sells was involved in the murder of the Dardeen family or if he was trying to just evade the death penalty by confessing to crimes he hadn't committed. To some investigators, Sells' 2014 execution by Texas was justice for the Dardeens as well. He was never charged with their murders, but, quote, "he remains the number one suspect," which was said by Douglas Hoffman, who was Jefferson County state attorney. Sheriff Roger Mulch agreed. The county deputy sheriff who interviewed Sells in his Texas cell says he knew details of the crime that had been kept confidential. The Dardeen family are buried together in Graceland Cemetery in Albion Edwards County, Illinois. However, more than 3 decades later, the murder of the Dardeen family remains unsolved, and unfortunately, it likely seems that it's going to remain that way.
That is a shame.
And that's the story of the Dardeen family murder.
Well, thank you for that. That was suggested by a listener.
No, I have several sites that I follow. That I read through various articles and whatnot, and just I picked that one out. It's kind of interesting, especially the headline on that one was the murder so gruesome or the murder that was deemed too gruesome for daytime TV.
Oh yeah.
So that one just kind of caught my eye. So yeah, so that's it. Thanks for taking that journey with me. That'll wrap us up for another recording week. As always, you can find more information on our show at nerderymurdery.com. That is the hub to our show where you can find links to everything we talked about, plus pictures of the topics we covered. Plus, you can find link to our YouTube page, which Zig so often updates.
That's right. All of these songs are on that YouTube page, as well as a documentary about the Longhorn. Awesome. You can listen to that list. You can also listen to it on Spotify. I've made some Spotify lists as well. Just type in Nerdery and Murdery and you'll get a bunch of episode lists. So for every music episode we do, there's a Spotify list. And when this episode airs, I link it to the list as well. So you got everything there together.
Awesome. You can also find the link on our webpage to our merchandise page, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery and Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing some merchandise from there. You can also find the link to our Patreon. Our Patreon, along with our merchandise, does help for the cost of this show. There are costs that are involved with keeping us on the air. So if you want to continue hearing the topics you're talking about, please do consider becoming a patron, because it does help us out and helps others to find us. So keep that up. And you can also, if you're jonesing for extra Nerdery and Murdery, there are exclusive episodes that only our patrons can get to.
Oh yeah. Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the topics we discuss. So with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.